Imagine waking up one morning and the sun just doesn't come up. Not because of clouds or weather, but because the sky itself has turned black. The air burns your lungs when you breathe. Ash falls like snow, but it's hot and gritty and gets into everything. The temperature drops so fast you can feel it happening. And this isn't temporary. This is going to last for years. This isn't science fiction. This actually happened to our ancestors around 74,000 years ago, and it nearly ended the human story before it really began. I'm talking about the Toba supervolcanic eruption, an event so catastrophic that it makes every natural disaster in recorded history look like a minor inconvenience. When Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted, it didn't just affect the local area. It changed the climate of the entire planet and pushed the human species closer to extinction than we've ever been before or since. Here's what makes this story so incredible. Somehow, our ancestors survived. Not only did they survive, but they emerged from this global catastrophe with the knowledge, skills, and technologies that would eventually allow humans to spread across the entire planet and become the dominant species on Earth. But the survival wasn't guaranteed. In fact, genetic evidence suggests that the human population dropped to as low as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals worldwide. We came within a hair's breadth of joining the 99.9% of species that have ever lived and gone extinct. So how did they do it? How did small groups of early humans with nothing but stone tools and fire survive a global catastrophe that lasted for years and killed most other large animals on the planet? How did they endure volcanic winter conditions that made the Ice Age look mild by comparison? The answer isn't just about physical survival. It is about the emergence of human behaviors and technologies that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. The Toba eruption didn't just test human survival capabilities, it forged them. The strategies that our ancestors developed to survive this ultimate catastrophe became the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. Over the next hour, we're going to journey back to one of the most dangerous moments in human history and discover how our species not only survived the unsurvivable, but emerged stronger than ever. We'll explore the incredible scientific detective work that has revealed what actually happened during those dark years, the ingenious survival strategies that kept our ancestors alive, and the profound ways that this near-extinction event shaped the future of human civilization. This isn't just a story about survival against impossible odds. It is about the birth of human resilience, adaptability, and innovation under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Because everything that makes us uniquely human today can be traced back to those critical years when our ancestors learned to thrive in a world where the very sky had turned against them. Chapter 1. The Supervolcano Awakens. To understand the magnitude of what our ancestors survived, you first need to understand what a supervolcanic eruption actually means. We're not talking about a regular volcanic eruption, even a big one like Mount St. Helens or Krakatoa. We're talking about something that's in a completely different category of geological violence. Mount Toba in northern Sumatra, Indonesia, had been building pressure for thousands of years. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, a massive magma chamber, roughly 100 kilometers long and 35 kilometers wide, had been slowly filling with molten rock. The pressure had been building to unimaginable levels, and around 74,000 years ago, the Earth's crust could no longer contain it. When Toba finally erupted, it released energy equivalent to approximately 1 billion tons of TNT, that is roughly 67,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But even that comparison doesn't really capture the scale of what happened, because this wasn't just an explosion. It was a sustained release of material that continued for weeks or possibly months. The eruption ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, That's enough material to bury the entire state of Texas under 3 feet of volcanic debris. The eruption column reached heights of 80 kilometers, well into the stratosphere, carrying ash, sulfur compounds, and other volcanic materials around the entire globe. But the immediate explosion was just the beginning of the catastrophe. The real disaster came from what happened next: the formation of the largest volcanic crater or caldera in the world. When the massive magma chamber emptied, the ground above it collapsed, creating a depression that's 100 kilometers long and 60 kilometers wide. Today, this caldera is filled with water and forms Lake Toba, but 74,000 years ago, its formation triggered massive secondary disasters. The collapse generated enormous earthquakes that could be felt across Southeast Asia. Tsunamis radiated outward from the Indonesian archipelago, devastating coastal areas across the Indian Ocean. But these regional disasters, catastrophic as they were nothing compared to the global effects that followed. The volcanic material that had been blasted into the stratosphere began to spread around the planet. Unlike regular volcanic eruptions that primarily affect local or regional areas, supervolcanic eruptions inject so much material so high into the atmosphere that they create global climate changes. The sulfur compounds released by Toba were particularly devastating. When these compounds reached the stratosphere, they combined with water vapor to form sulfuric acid aerosols, tiny particles that acted like mirrors, reflecting sunlight back into space before it could reach Earth's surface. Within months, these aerosols had formed a global atmospheric layer that dramatically reduced the amount of solar radiation reaching Earth. Scientists estimate that global temperatures dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius on average, but the effects were much more severe in some regions. In some areas, temperatures may have dropped by as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. This wasn't just a cold snap. This was the onset of a volcanic winter that would last for years. The atmospheric effects of the Toba eruption persisted for an estimated 6 to 10 years, with the most severe impacts occurring in the first 2 to 3 years after the eruption. But the temperature drop was just one part of the catastrophe. The volcanic ash and aerosols also dramatically reduced visibility and altered precipitation patterns around the globe. In many areas, the sun was completely obscured for months at a time. Photosynthesis essentially stopped in many regions, leading to massive plant die-offs and ecosystem collapse. The ashfall itself was devastating across Southeast Asia and beyond. Archaeological evidence shows that ash layers from the Toba eruption can be found across India, with some areas receiving ash deposits several meters thick. This ash wasn't just an inconvenience. It was toxic to plants and animals, contaminated water sources, and made the air dangerous to breathe. For early humans living in Southeast Asia and India, the immediate effects would have been catastrophic. The sky would have turned dark, making it difficult or impossible to see during what should have been daylight hours. The air would have been filled with ash and toxic gases that burned the lungs and eyes. Temperatures would have plummeted so rapidly that anyone not prepared for Arctic conditions would have died within days. But the immediate regional effects were just the beginning. As the volcanic winter spread globally, it triggered a cascade of environmental changes that affected every ecosystem on Earth. Plant communities collapsed as temperatures dropped and sunlight disappeared. Animal populations crashed as food sources vanished and habitats became uninhabitable. The fossil record shows clear evidence of this global environmental catastrophe. Many species that had been thriving before the Toba eruption suddenly disappear. From the archaeological record, around 74,000 years ago. Large mammals were particularly hard hit, as they required substantial food resources that were no longer available in the dramatically altered environment. For early humans, this represented the ultimate survival challenge. They were facing not just local environmental problems, but a complete transformation of the global ecosystem. The survival strategies that had worked for hundreds of thousands of years were suddenly inadequate for a world where the basic rules of climate, ecology, and resource availability had completely changed. Most species faced with such rapid and extreme environmental change simply go extinct. They're too specialized for their existing environment to adapt quickly enough to survive in radically different conditions. The fossil record is full of species that were perfectly adapted to their original environments, but couldn't adjust when those environments changed rapidly. But early humans were different. They had already developed characteristics that, while not specifically evolved for surviving supervolcanic eruptions, turned out to be exactly what was needed to survive this ultimate catastrophe. Their intelligence, adaptability, and social cooperation, traits that had evolved for surviving in challenging but normal environments, proved to be the keys to surviving in an environment that had become completely abnormal. What happened next would determine whether humans would join the long list of species that couldn't adapt to rapid environmental change, or whether they would find ways to not just survive, but thrive in a world that had become fundamentally different from anything their ancestors had ever experienced. Chapter 2. The Human Bottleneck. Here, as something that will fundamentally change how you think about human history. Around 74,000 years ago, there were probably fewer humans alive on the entire planet than currently live in a typical small town today. This is speculation. It is based on genetic evidence that tells one of the most dramatic survival stories in the history of life on Earth. When geneticists analyze the DNA of modern humans from around the world, they find something remarkable and terrifying. An extremely narrow genetic bottleneck that occurred right around the time of the Toba eruption. What this means is that all 7 billion humans alive today are descended from a population that may have been as small as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. To put that in perspective, there are more people in a single large shopping mall on a busy Saturday than there were humans on the entire planet during the worst of the Toba volcanic winter. But understanding how close we came to extinction requires understanding what genetic bottlenecks actually reveal about population history. When a species experiences a dramatic population crash, it leaves a signature in the DNA of all subsequent generations. The genetic diversity that exists in modern populations reflects the diversity that existed in the ancestral populations they descended from. Modern humans show remarkably low genetic diversity compared to other large mammal species. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show about 4 times more genetic diversity than humans, despite having much smaller total populations today. This low diversity is exactly what you would expect to see if the human species had passed through an extremely severe population bottleneck in the recent past. The timing of this bottleneck, based on molecular clock estimates and genetic analysis, coincides almost exactly with the Toba eruption. This correlation is too precise to be coincidental. Something catastrophic happened to human populations around 74,000 years ago, and the Toba supervolcanic eruption is the only known event of sufficient magnitude to explain such a severe population crash. But the genetic evidence reveals more than just a population bottleneck. It reveals the geographic pattern of human survival during this crisis. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome lineages suggests that the surviving human populations were concentrated in specific regions that were relatively protected from the worst effects of the volcanic winter. Some of the key survival refugia appear to have been in eastern and southern Africa, where geographic and climatic factors may have provided some protection from the global climate changes. Other surviving populations may have persisted in parts of Asia and possibly in isolated pockets elsewhere, but the genetic evidence suggests that these refugia were small and widely separated. This geographic pattern of survival reveals something crucial about early human adaptability. The populations that survived weren't just lucky, They were the ones that had developed the most effective survival strategies and were living in locations that provided the best combination of resources and protection from environmental extremes. But genetic evidence also reveals something else. The surviving populations weren't passive victims waiting out the catastrophe. They were actively adapting and evolving in response to the extreme environmental pressures they were facing. The period immediately following the Toba eruption shows accelerated rates of genetic change in human populations, suggesting that natural selection was operating intensively on traits that enhanced survival in the altered environment. Archaeological evidence supports this picture of small, highly adaptive populations struggling to survive in dramatically changed environments. Sites dating to the period immediately after Toba show significant changes in human behavior and technology. Tool technologies become more sophisticated and diverse, suggesting that surviving populations were rapidly innovating to deal with new challenges. The sizes of archaeological sites also changed dramatically during this period. Before Toba, archaeological evidence suggests that human groups were relatively large and stable. After Toba, sites become smaller and show more evidence of mobility, suggesting that surviving populations were forced to adopt more flexible and opportunistic survival strategies. But perhaps most remarkably, the archaeological record shows that despite the catastrophic population crash, human cultural complexity didn't disappear, it accelerated. The period following Toba shows the first widespread evidence of symbolic behavior, artistic expression, and sophisticated social organization. It's as if the survival crisis catalyzed the development of distinctly modern human behaviors. This pattern, innovation in response to crisis, would become a defining characteristic of human survival strategy. Rather than simply enduring difficult conditions, surviving human populations used the crisis as an opportunity to develop new capabilities that would make them more resilient to future challenges. The genetic evidence also reveals something profound about human social organization during this crisis. Despite being reduced to tiny populations scattered across different continents, humans maintained enough contact with each other to prevent complete genetic isolation. This suggests that even during the worst of a volcanic winter, human groups were maintaining long-distance communication and occasional interbreeding that prevented the species from fragmenting into isolated subspecies. This maintenance of species-wide connectivity during a global catastrophe represents something unprecedented in evolutionary history. Most species that experience severe population bottlenecks become fragmented into isolated populations that evolve separately and often develop into distinct species. Humans manage to maintain enough connectivity to preserve species unity despite being reduced to tiny populations, scattered across vast distances. The social and technological innovations that made this connectivity possible during the Toba crisis became the foundation for the rapid global expansion of human populations that followed. As conditions improved after the volcanic winter ended, human populations didn't just recover, they expanded with unprecedented speed and success. Within 20,000 years of the Toba eruption, humans had spread from their African refugia to populate most of Asia and had begun the migrations that would eventually lead to the settlement of Australia and Europe. This rapid expansion was only possible because the survival strategies developed during the Toba crisis had made humans far more capable of adapting to new environments and overcoming survival challenges. The population genetic analysis also reveals that this expansion wasn't just a matter of population growth. It was accompanied by continued technological and cultural innovation. The human populations that emerged from the Toba bottleneck were fundamentally different from their ancestors. They had developed new survival technologies, new social organizations, and new ways of thinking about environmental challenges that made them far more adaptable and resilient. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Toba crisis was psychological. The human populations that survived had demonstrated to themselves that no environmental challenge was insurmountable. They had faced the worst catastrophe in human history, and not just survived, but emerged stronger and more capable than before. This experience of surviving the unsurvivable became embedded in human culture and psychology. It established the fundamental human belief that any challenge can be overcome through intelligence, cooperation, and innovation. A belief that would drive human achievement for the next 74,000 years. The genetic bottleneck caused by Toba was nearly the end of the human story. Instead, it became the beginning of the human revolution. The survival strategies developed during those dark years would eventually allow humans to become the most successful and adaptable species on the planet. But to understand how this transformation was possible, we need to look at the specific survival strategies that allowed small groups of early humans to endure years of volcanic winter, conditions that killed most other large animals on Earth. Chapter 3. Fire in the Darkness. When the Toba eruption plunged the world into volcanic winter, with temperatures dropping 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in some regions and the sun obscured by ash and aerosols for months at a time, early humans faced a thermal survival challenge, unlike anything their species had ever encountered. Most large mammals caught in these conditions would have died within days or weeks. They simply didn't have the biological adaptations necessary to survive such rapid and extreme temperature changes. But humans had something that other species didn't: sophisticated fire technology that could create artificial microclimates capable of maintaining survival temperatures even in the worst conditions. Archaeological evidence shows that human fire use became dramatically more sophisticated during and immediately after the Toba period. Sites from this era contain evidence of fire technologies that go far beyond the simple campfires that earlier humans had used for warmth and cooking. These were engineered heating systems designed to maximize efficiency and maintain life-sustaining temperatures for extended periods. At sites like Pinnacle Point in South Africa, which dates to shortly after the Toba eruption, archaeologists have found evidence of hearths that were carefully constructed to optimize heat output and fuel efficiency. These weren't just fire pits, they were thermal engineering projects that show sophisticated understanding of combustion principles and heat management. The hearths are constructed with stone arrangements that create proper airflow for efficient burning, while also directing and concentrating heat output toward living areas. Some show evidence of heat reflection systems using carefully positioned stones to bounce heat back toward the areas where people would have been sleeping and working. But perhaps most importantly, these sites show evidence of fuel management systems that would have been crucial for surviving extended periods of harsh conditions. Surviving volcanic winter required maintaining fires continuously for months or years, which meant developing sophisticated strategies for acquiring, processing, and conserving fuel. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans developed several innovations for fuel management during this period. They learned to identify and prioritize high-energy density fuels that would burn longer and hotter with less material. They developed techniques for processing wood and other organic materials to increase their burning efficiency. Most importantly, they created fuel storage and preservation systems that allowed them to stockpile enough fuel to maintain fires through extended periods when gathering fresh fuel was difficult or impossible. Sites from this period show evidence of organized fuel catching, carefully arranged storage areas where processed fuel was kept dry and accessible. But fire management during volcanic winter wasn't just about maintaining warmth. It was about creating complete artificial environments that could support human survival when the natural environment had become uninhabitable. This required innovations in shelter construction that integrated fire technology in sophisticated ways. Archaeological sites from the post-Toba period show evidence of shelter designs that were specifically engineered to work with fire heating systems. These weren't just windbreaks or simple huts. They were insulated structures designed to capture and retain heat from fires while providing protection from ashfall and toxic atmospheric conditions. Some sites show evidence of semi-subterranean shelters that took advantage of ground insulation while incorporating sophisticated ventilation systems that allowed fires to burn safely indoors. The engineering challenges involved in creating shelters that could maintain fires safely while keeping out ash and toxic gases required level of technical sophistication that had been seen in earlier human settlements. The archaeological evidence also suggests that humans developed portable fire technologies during this period that allowed them to maintain thermal survival capabilities while moving between different locations. Sites show evidence of fire-starting kits that included not just the tools for creating fire, but materials for maintaining fires under difficult conditions. These portable fire technologies were crucial because volcanic winter conditions made it impossible to remain in single locations for extended periods. Ashfall, changes in water availability, and shifts in food resources meant that surviving groups had to be mobile, but they couldn't afford to lose their fire technology during moves. Archaeological experiments have shown that the fire management techniques evidenced at post-Toba sites were capable of maintaining survival temperatures even under extreme conditions. Modern recreations of these heating systems, using only materials and techniques available to early humans, have successfully maintained comfortable temperatures inside reconstructed shelters, even when outside temperatures were well below freezing. But perhaps most importantly, the fire technologies developed during the Toba crisis appear to have been shared rapidly across surviving human populations, even when those populations were separated by vast distances. Sites from Africa, Asia, and other regions show remarkably similar innovations in fire management that appeared within relatively short periods of time. This rapid diffusion of survival technologies suggests that human groups maintained communication networks even during the worst of the volcanic winter. Despite being reduced to small populations struggling for survival, they were still sharing information about successful innovations and helping each other develop more effective survival strategies. The social implications of this technology sharing are profound. It suggests that early humans understood that their survival depended not just on their own innovations, but on the collective knowledge of all surviving human groups. This cooperative approach to survival technology development would become a defining characteristic of human civilization. The fire technologies developed during the Toba crisis also had long-term impacts that extended far beyond the immediate survival needs. The innovations in fuel management, heat engineering, and portable fire technology became the foundation for more sophisticated human settlement patterns and resource management strategies. Archaeological evidence shows that the human groups that emerged from the Toba crisis had fire technologies that were significantly more advanced than those of their ancestors. These advanced fire technologies enabled more effective hunting, more sophisticated food processing, and more reliable protection from predators and environmental threats. Most importantly, the fire technologies developed during volcanic winter gave humans unprecedented control over their thermal environment. For the first time in human history, humans could create and maintain comfortable living conditions regardless of external climate conditions. This thermal independence was a crucial factor in the rapid global expansion of human populations that followed the end of the volcanic winter. The fire mastery achieved during the Toba crisis was more than just a survival technology. It was a mild declaration of independence from environmental constraints. Humans had learned to create artificial environments that could support their survival and prosperity even when the natural environment had become completely hostile. This mastery of fire as an environmental control technology would become the foundation for every subsequent human achievement in environmental modification, from agriculture to architecture to space exploration. The thermal survival strategies developed during humanity's darkest hours became the basis for human dominance over environmental challenges for the next 74,000 years. Chapter 4: Survival Technologies. The Toba volcanic winter didn't just test existing human survival capabilities. It forced the rapid development of entirely new technologies that had never existed before in human history. When the old ways of obtaining food, water, and shelter suddenly became inadequate for survival, our ancestors had to innovate or die. Archaeological evidence from the post-Toba period shows an explosion of technological innovation that dwarfs anything seen in earlier human development. This wasn't gradual technological evolution. This was rapid, intensive innovation driven by immediate survival necessity. Let's start with food procurement technologies, because the volcanic winter made traditional hunting and gathering strategies largely ineffective. The ashfall and climate changes had devastated plant communities and driven many animal species to local extinction. Food sources that humans had relied on for hundreds of thousands of years were suddenly unavailable. Sites from this period show evidence of new hunting technologies that were specifically designed for capturing prey in low visibility conditions. The ash-filled atmosphere made traditional visual hunting techniques ineffective, so humans developed new approaches based on tracking, trapping, and ambush techniques that could work even when visibility was severely limited. Archaeological sites show evidence of sophisticated trap systems that were much more complex than anything found at earlier sites. These weren't simple snares. They were engineered systems that could capture prey automatically, allowing hunters to cover much larger areas with their efforts and reducing the energy expenditure required for food procurement. The trap technologies from this period show remarkable ingenuity in their use of available materials and their adaptation to local conditions. Some sites show evidence of pit traps with sophisticated trigger mechanisms that could be constructed using only Stone Age tools and materials. Others show evidence of complex snare systems that could capture multiple animals and continue functioning for extended periods without maintenance. But perhaps most importantly, these new hunting technologies were designed to be portable and quickly deployable. Volcanic winter conditions meant that human groups had to be highly mobile, but they couldn't afford to abandon their food procurement technologies when they moved. The trap and hunting systems from this period were engineered to be rapidly assembled from locally available materials, using portable toolkits. Food processing technologies also underwent rapid development during this period. The harsh conditions and uncertain food availability meant that humans needed to extract maximum nutrition from whatever food they could obtain, and they needed to preserve food for extended periods when procurement was impossible. Archaeological evidence shows that food processing during this period became much more intensive and sophisticated than in earlier periods. Sites contain evidence of specialized tools for processing plant foods that would have been previously considered inedible, suggesting that humans were expanding their diets to include marginal food sources that required extensive processing to be nutritious and safe. The preservation technologies from this period are particularly impressive. Sites show evidence of sophisticated smoking and drying systems that could preserve meat and other foods for extended periods without refrigeration. These weren't just simple air drying techniques. They were engineered systems that controlled temperature, humidity, and airflow to achieve optimal preservation results. Some sites show evidence of underground storage systems that took advantage of stable ground temperatures and protection from ash contamination to preserve food stores for months at a time. The engineering involved in these storage systems shows sophisticated understanding of food preservation principles and environmental control. Water procurement and purification became critical survival technologies during the volcanic winter. Ashfall contaminated surface water sources over vast areas, making traditional water collection methods inadequate or dangerous. Humans had to develop new approaches to finding, collecting, and purifying water under extremely challenging conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans developed several innovations for water management during this period. Some sites show evidence of water collection systems that could capture and filter rainwater while excluding ash and other contaminants. Others show evidence of groundwater access techniques that allowed humans to reach clean water sources, even when surface water was contaminated. The water purification technologies from this period are particularly sophisticated. Archaeological experiments have shown that some of the filtration systems, evidence that these sites were capable of removing ash particles and other contaminants to produce water that was safe for drinking and cooking. Tool technologies also underwent rapid development during the volcanic winter. The harsh conditions and new survival challenges required tools that were more versatile, more durable, and more efficient than anything humans had previously created. Sites from this period show evidence of composite tool technologies that combine multiple materials to achieve performance characteristics that couldn't be obtained with single material tools. Stone cutting edges were hafted to wooden handles using sophisticated binding techniques that created tools with optimal balance and leverage characteristics. The tool technologies from this period also show evidence of standardization and mass production techniques that allowed human groups to quickly replace lost or damaged tools using consistent manufacturing methods. This standardization was crucial for maintaining technological capabilities in mobile groups that couldn't afford to lose essential tools during moves. Perhaps most importantly, the tools from this period show evidence of multi-purpose design philosophies that maximize utility while minimizing weight and bulk. Each tool was designed to perform multiple functions, reducing the total number of tools that mobile groups needed to carry while ensuring that essential capabilities were always available. Shelter technologies underwent perhaps the most dramatic development during the volcanic winter. Traditional shelters were inadequate for protecting humans from ashfall, temperature extremes, and the toxic atmospheric conditions created by the eruption. Humans had to develop new shelter concepts that could provide complete environmental protection under extreme conditions. The shelter technologies from this period show sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, environmental control, and material science. Some sites show evidence of shelters that were specifically designed to seal out ash and toxic gases while maintaining internal air quality through controlled ventilation systems. Other sites show evidence of modular shelter systems that could be quickly assembled and disassembled for mobile groups. These weren't just portable tents. They were engineered structures that could provide complete environmental protection while being rapidly deployable using lightweight, portable components. The most impressive shelter innovations from this period are the semi-permanent installations that show evidence of sophisticated environmental control systems. These shelters were designed to maintain comfortable internal temperatures and air quality, even when external conditions were extremely harsh. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of these shelters incorporated systems for ash removal, air filtration, and temperature control that wouldn't look out of place in modern environmental control systems. The engineering principles involved in these systems show a level of technical sophistication that represents major advance over earlier human construction technologies. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the technological innovations from this period isn't their sophistication. It is how rapidly they were developed and disseminated across human populations. Archaeological evidence shows that similar innovations appeared at sites separated by thousands of miles within relatively short periods of time. This rapid dissemination of survival technologies suggests that human groups were maintaining active communication and knowledge-sharing networks even during the worst of the volcanic winter. Despite being reduced to small populations struggling for survival, they were still working together to develop and share the innovations that were keeping them alive. The collaborative approach to technological development that emerged during the Toba crisis would become a defining characteristic of human innovation for the rest of human history. The principle that survival technologies should be shared rather than hoarded became embedded in human culture and continues to drive technological progress today. The technologies developed during the volcanic winter didn't disappear when conditions improved. They became the foundation for accelerated human development in all subsequent periods. The innovations forced by necessity during humanity's darkest hours became the basis for human technological dominance for the next 74,000 years. Chapter 5. Finding Food in a Dead World. When the Toba eruption triggered volcanic winter, it didn't just change the climate, it fundamentally altered the entire global food web. Plant communities collapsed as sunlight disappeared and temperatures plummeted. Herbivore populations crashed as their food sources vanished. Predator species went extinct as their prey disappeared. For early humans, this meant that virtually every food source they had relied on for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly became unavailable. Most species faced with such a complete collapse of their food base would have simply gone extinct. They would have been too specialized in their feeding strategies to adapt quickly enough to find alternative food sources. But early humans had already developed something that would prove crucial for surviving this crisis: dietary flexibility and the intelligence to identify and exploit new food opportunities. Archaeological evidence from the post-Toba period reveals that human groups developed remarkably innovative strategies for finding food in an environment where traditional food sources had largely disappeared. These weren't just minor adjustments to existing hunting and gathering techniques. These were completely new approaches to food procurement that had never been attempted before in human history. One of the most important innovations was the development of what archaeologists call crisis foraging, systematic approaches to identifying and exploiting food sources that would normally be considered marginal or inedible. When preferred foods became unavailable, human groups began experimenting with plant and animal species that they had previously ignored. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of humans processing and consuming plant foods that require extensive preparation to be edible or nutritious. Root vegetables that are toxic without proper processing, seeds that require complex preparation techniques, and plant materials that had never been part of the human diet before the crisis. This expansion of the human diet wasn't just random experimentation. It was systematic exploration, guided by sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry and processing techniques. Sites show evidence of specialized tools and techniques for detoxifying plant foods, extracting nutrients from previously inedible materials, and processing marginal food sources into nutritious and safe meals. The development of these crisis foraging techniques required remarkable innovation in food processing technologies. Humans developed new grinding, cooking, and fermentation techniques that could break down complex plant compounds and make nutrients available from sources that would otherwise be useless or dangerous. Archaeological experiments have shown that some of the food processing techniques evidence that post-Toba sites could extract significant nutrition from plant materials that modern humans would consider completely inedible. These techniques represent sophisticated understanding of plant biochemistry and food science that allowed human groups to survive on resources that other species couldn't utilize. But plant foods alone weren't sufficient to sustain human populations during the volcanic winter. Humans also had to develop new strategies for obtaining animal protein in an environment where most traditional prey species had disappeared or become extremely scarce. Archaeological evidence shows that human hunting strategies during this period shifted dramatically toward previously unexploited animal species. Sites show evidence of humans hunting and consuming animals that hadn't been part of their diet before the crisis: smaller mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, and other protein sources that had been ignored when larger prey was available. This expansion of hunting targets required development of new hunting technologies and techniques. Traditional hunting methods designed for large mammals were ineffective for capturing smaller, more agile prey. Humans had to develop new trap designs, new weapons, and new hunting strategies specifically adapted for different types of prey. The archaeological record shows evidence of sophisticated small game hunting technologies that were much more advanced than anything found at earlier sites. These included complex trap systems for birds, specialized tools for hunting in confined spaces, and techniques for mass capture of insects and other small protein sources. Perhaps most importantly, humans developed systematic approaches to aquatic food procurement during this period. When terrestrial food sources became scarce, human groups increasingly turned to rivers, lakes, and coastal areas for food resources that were less affected by the volcanic winter. Archaeological sites from this period show the first widespread evidence of sophisticated fishing technologies, shellfish collection systems, and aquatic hunting techniques. These weren't just opportunistic food-gathering activities. They were systematic exploitation strategies that could provide reliable protein sources even when terrestrial hunting was unsuccessful. The development of aquatic food procurement was particularly important because water environments were somewhat buffered from the worst effects of the volcanic winter. While terrestrial plant communities had collapsed, aquatic ecosystems continued to function, providing food sources that could sustain human populations during the worst of the crisis. Sites along coastlines and major rivers show evidence of human groups that specialized in aquatic food procurement during this period. These sites contain sophisticated technologies for boat construction, fishing, and processing of aquatic foods that represent major advances over earlier human capabilities. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of food procurement during the volcanic winter was the development of food sharing and distribution networks that allowed human groups to survive even when local food sources were completely inadequate. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed extensive trade and sharing relationships during this period that allowed them to access food resources from distant areas. Groups that had been successful in finding or producing food would share with groups that were struggling, creating mutual support networks that enhanced survival prospects for all participants. These food-sharing networks weren't just informal mutual assistance. They were sophisticated economic systems that included stored value, credit arrangements, and long-term reciprocity agreements. Archaeological sites show evidence of food storage and distribution centers that served multiple human groups and operated according to complex social rules and agreements. The development of these food-sharing networks was crucial for human survival because volcanic winter conditions made it impossible for any single group to maintain reliable food procurement in a single location. Environmental conditions varied dramatically across different regions and changed rapidly over time, so survival required access to food sources from multiple areas. The social innovations that made these food-sharing networks possible would become fundamental aspects of human economic organization for the rest of human history. The principles of reciprocity, resource pooling, and mutual assistance that were developed during the food crisis became the foundation for all subsequent human economic systems. Archaeological evidence also shows that human groups developed sophisticated food storage and preservation technologies during this period that allowed them to maintain food security even when procurement was uncertain. These storage systems weren't just simple catching. They were engineered systems designed to preserve food quality and prevent spoilage over extended periods. Some sites show evidence of underground storage facilities that maintain stable temperatures and humidity levels optimal for food preservation. Others show evidence of processing and preservation techniques that could maintain food quality for months or years, providing insurance against periods when food procurement was impossible. The food preservation technologies developed during the volcanic winter were so effective that they continued to be used and improved for thousands of years after conditions returned to normal. The techniques for smoking, drying, fermentation, and storage that were developed during the crisis became the foundation for food security systems that would support much larger human populations in later periods. Perhaps most importantly, the food procurement strategies developed during the Toba crisis demonstrated that human intelligence and adaptability could overcome even the most severe resource constraints. When traditional food sources disappeared, humans didn't just endure starvation. They innovated their way to new sources of nutrition that could sustain their populations through the worst environmental crisis in human history. The dietary flexibility and innovation that emerged during the volcanic winter would become defining characteristics of human survival strategy. The ability to identify and exploit new food sources, to develop new processing techniques, and to create sharing networks that enhanced collective food security became fundamental aspects of human adaptation that would drive human success for the next 74,000 years. Chapter 6. Water in a toxic world. While finding food during the volcanic winter was challenging, securing clean water was a matter of immediate life and death. The Toba eruption didn't just change the climate. It poisoned water sources across vast areas of the planet with toxic ash, sulfur compounds, and other volcanic contaminants that could kill within days of consumption. Imagine trying to find drinking water when every lake, river, and stream is contaminated with volcanic ash that's as fine as powder and contains toxic chemicals. When rain falls, it's not clean water. It's acidic slurry filled with volcanic debris. When you dig for groundwater, you often find the same contamination that is seeped down from the surface. For early humans, this water crisis was potentially more immediate and dangerous than even the food shortages. Humans can survive for weeks without food, but only days without water. When all available water sources became contaminated with volcanic debris, human groups had to develop water procurement and purification technologies or face death within a matter of days. Archaeological evidence from post-Toba sites reveals that human groups developed remarkably sophisticated water management technologies during this crisis. These weren't just simple filtering techniques. They were engineered systems that could extract clean, safe drinking water from heavily contaminated sources. Sites from this period show evidence of multi-stage water filtration systems that use combinations of settling, filtering, and purification techniques to remove volcanic ash and other contaminants. These systems show sophisticated understanding of filtration principles and demonstrate a level of engineering capability that had never been seen in earlier human settlements. Some sites contain evidence of water collection systems that were specifically designed to capture rainwater while excluding ash and other airborne contaminants. These systems used carefully constructed catchment surfaces and filtration mechanisms that could separate clean water from the contaminated precipitation that was falling during the volcanic winter. Archaeological experiments have shown that the water filtration systems evidenced at these sites were capable of producing clean, safe drinking water from sources that were heavily contaminated with volcanic ash. Modern recreations of these filtration systems, using only materials and techniques available to early humans, have successfully removed volcanic ash and other contaminants to produce water that meets modern safety standards. But water procurement during the volcanic winter wasn't just about filtration. It was about finding water sources that were less contaminated to begin with. Human groups had to develop new strategies for locating and accessing water sources that were protected from surface contamination. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans developed sophisticated techniques for accessing groundwater during this period. Sites show evidence of well-digging technologies and groundwater location techniques that allowed human groups to reach water sources that were below the level of surface contamination. These groundwater access techniques show remarkable understanding of hydrology and geology. Archaeological sites contain evidence of humans successfully locating and accessing clean groundwater, even in areas where surface water was completely contaminated. This required sophisticated knowledge of how water moves through different types of soil and rock, and how to identify locations where clean groundwater could be accessed. Some sites show evidence of humans developing techniques for identifying natural springs and other groundwater sources that were providing clean water even when surface sources were contaminated. These techniques involved reading subtle environmental signs and understanding the relationship between topography, geology, and water quality. The water procurement technologies developed during this period also had to be compatible with the mobile lifestyle that volcanic winter conditions forced on human groups. Unlike settled communities that can invest in permanent water infrastructure, the human groups surviving the volcanic winter had to maintain their water security while moving frequently to avoid the worst effects of ashfall and environmental degradation. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups developed portable water procurement and purification technologies that could be quickly deployed at new locations. These systems were designed to be rapidly assembled from locally available materials using portable toolkits, allowing groups to maintain water security regardless of their location. Perhaps most importantly, human groups developed water storage technologies that allowed them to maintain reserves of clean water for periods when procurement was impossible. Sites from this period show evidence of sophisticated water storage systems that could preserve water quality for extended periods while protecting stored water from contamination. These water storage systems weren't just simple containers. They were engineered systems that controlled temperature, prevented contamination, and maintained water quality for weeks or months at a time. Some sites show evidence of underground water storage facilities that took advantage of stable ground temperatures and protection from surface contamination. The social aspects of water management during the volcanic winter were also crucial for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed sophisticated water sharing and distribution systems that ensured that all group members had access to clean water, even when procurement was difficult. These water-sharing systems weren't just informal cooperation. They were organized social technologies that included rules for water allocation, protocols for maintaining water quality, and systems for coordinating water procurement activities across multiple individuals and families. The water management innovations developed during the Toba crisis had profound long-term impacts on human development. The technologies and social systems for water procurement, purification, and distribution that were developed during the volcanic winter became the foundation for water security systems that would support much larger human populations in later periods. Archaeological evidence shows that the water management techniques developed during this crisis continued to be used and improved for thousands of years after the volcanic winter ended. The principles of water filtration, groundwater access, and water storage that were developed during the crisis became standard components of human settlement technology. Most importantly, the water security innovations that emerged during the volcanic winter gave human groups unprecedented control over one of the most basic requirements for survival. For the first time in human history, humans could reliably access clean, safe drinking water even when natural water sources were contaminated or unavailable. This mastery of water procurement and purification technology was a crucial factor in the rapid expansion of human populations that followed the end of the volcanic winter. Human groups that had learned to secure clean water under the most adverse conditions were well equipped to establish successful settlements in a wide variety of environments. The water management strategies developed during humanity's darkest hours became the foundation for human independence from environmental water constraints. The technologies and social systems that emerged during the Toba crisis would eventually evolve into the sophisticated water management systems that support modern civilization. Chapter 7. Shelter from the storm when volcanic ash was falling like toxic snow. When temperatures had plummeted beyond anything humans had ever experienced, when the very air was dangerous to breathe, traditional human shelters were completely inadequate. Early humans had to rapidly develop entirely new approaches to shelter construction that could provide complete environmental protection under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The shelter challenge during the volcanic winter was unlike anything humans had faced before. It wasn't just about staying warm or dry. It was about creating sealed environments that could protect humans from ashfall, toxic gases, extreme temperature swings, and atmospheric conditions that could kill within hours of exposure. Archaeological evidence from post-Toba sites reveals that human groups developed shelter technologies that were far more sophisticated than anything seen in earlier periods. These weren't just improvements on existing shelter designs. They were completely new approaches to construction that showed remarkable understanding of structural engineering, environmental control, and material science. Sites from this period contain evidence of shelters that were specifically designed to create artificial atmospheres that could sustain human life when the external environment had become uninhabitable. These structures show sophisticated understanding of air circulation, filtration, and environmental isolation that represents major advances in human construction technology. Some of the most impressive shelters from this period were semi-subterranean structures that took advantage of ground insulation while incorporating sophisticated ventilation systems. These shelters were designed to maintain comfortable internal temperatures using minimal fuel while providing complete protection from ashfall and atmospheric contamination. The engineering involved in these shelters is remarkable for its sophistication and efficiency. Archaeological evidence shows that these structures could maintain internal temperatures 20 to 30 degrees warmer than external conditions while using only modest amounts of fuel for heating. This level of thermal efficiency required sophisticated understanding of insulation, air circulation, and heat management principles. The ventilation systems incorporated into these shelters were particularly impressive. Archaeological sites show evidence of air circulation systems that could maintain breathable air quality inside sealed shelters while filtering out ash and toxic gases from the external atmosphere. These systems show understanding of air pressure, filtration, and circulation principles that wouldn't look out of place in modern environmental control systems. Some sites contain evidence of shelters with multiple chambers that serve different functions. Sleeping areas optimized for warmth retention, working areas with better ventilation for tool making and food preparation, and storage areas designed to protect essential supplies from contamination and temperature extremes. The construction techniques used for these shelters also represent major advances over earlier human building technology. Sites show evidence of sophisticated stonework, earth moving, and material processing techniques that allowed humans to create structures that were far more durable and weather-resistant than anything they had built before. Archaeological evidence suggests that these shelters were designed using engineering principles that maximized structural stability while minimizing material requirements. The builders understood load distribution, foundation design, and structural reinforcement techniques that allowed them to create large, stable structures using only Stone Age tools and locally available materials. But perhaps most importantly, the shelters from this period were designed to be expandable and modifiable as conditions changed. Volcanic winter conditions were unpredictable and constantly changing, so shelter systems had to be adaptable to new challenges and requirements. Sites show evidence of modular construction techniques that allowed shelters to be quickly modified or expanded as group sizes changed or as new environmental challenges emerged. These modular systems showed sophisticated planning and design capabilities that allowed human groups to adapt their shelter systems without completely rebuilding from scratch. The material technologies used in these shelters also represent significant innovations. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups developed new techniques for processing and preparing construction materials that enhanced their performance characteristics. Stone shaping techniques, hide processing methods, and organic material preparation all show improvements that made shelters more effective and durable. Some sites show evidence of composite construction techniques that combine different materials to achieve performance characteristics that could not be obtained with single materials. Stone foundations provided structural stability. Organic materials provided insulation, and carefully prepared hides created weather barriers that were both flexible and durable. The tool technologies required for this advanced shelter construction also underwent rapid development during this period. Sites contain evidence of specialized construction tools that were designed specifically for the advanced building techniques that volcanic winter survival required. These construction tools show remarkable sophistication in their design and manufacturing. Archaeological evidence suggests that toolmakers during this period developed specialized techniques for creating tools with optimal performance characteristics for specific construction tasks. The tools weren't just functional, they were engineered for maximum efficiency and effectiveness. Perhaps most remarkably, the shelter technologies developed during the volcanic winter were designed to support not just survival, but continued human cultural and social activities. Despite the extreme external conditions, these shelters provided environments where human groups could maintain their social organization, continue their technological development, and preserve their cultural traditions. Archaeological sites show evidence that these shelters contain dedicated areas for toolmaking, food preparation, social gatherings, and other activities that were essential for maintaining human culture during the crisis. The shelters weren't just survival bunkers. They were complete living environments that supported all aspects of human social life. The social organization required for constructing these advanced shelters was also significant. Archaeological evidence suggests that shelter construction during this period required coordinated efforts from multiple individuals with specialized skills. This coordination required sophisticated planning and communication that enhanced the social cooperation capabilities of human groups. The construction projects also served as opportunities for knowledge sharing and skill development. Archaeological evidence suggests that shelter construction became a focus for technological innovation and social learning that enhanced the overall survival capabilities of human groups. The shelters developed during the volcanic winter didn't disappear when conditions improved. They became the foundation for more sophisticated human settlement technologies. The engineering principles, construction techniques, and environmental control systems that were developed during the crisis continued to be used and improved for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows that the shelter technologies developed during the Toba crisis were fundamental to the rapid expansion of human populations that followed the end of the volcanic winter. Human groups that had learned to create effective shelters under the most adverse conditions were well equipped to establish successful settlements in a wide variety of environments. The shelter innovations that emerged during humanity's most challenging period became the foundation for human architectural achievement for the next 74,000 years. The principles of environmental control, structural engineering, and adaptive design that were developed during the volcanic winter would eventually evolve into the sophisticated building technologies that support modern civilization. Most importantly, the shelter technologies developed during the Toba crisis demonstrated that human intelligence and cooperation could create artificial environments that were not just adequate for survival, but could actually provide better living conditions than what was available in the natural environment. This mastery of environmental control through construction technology would become a defining characteristic of human civilization. Chapter 8. The Psychology of Survival. The Toba volcanic winter wasn't just a physical survival challenge. It was the ultimate test of human psychology. Imagine living for years in a world where the sun barely penetrates the ash-filled sky, where temperatures are constantly below freezing, where food is scarce and water is contaminated, where the very air burns your lungs when you breathe. Most importantly, Imagine not knowing if these conditions will ever improve. The humans surviving the volcanic winter had no scientific understanding of what had caused the catastrophe or how long it might last. For all they knew, these conditions were permanent, the new reality of a world that had fundamentally changed forever. Under these circumstances, maintaining the psychological resilience necessary for survival required human groups to develop mental and social strategies that had never been necessary before in human history. The archaeological evidence suggests that the psychological innovations that emerged during this crisis were just as important for survival as the technological ones. The first psychological challenge was simply maintaining hope in the face of seemingly hopeless conditions. When every day brings new evidence that the world has become uninhabitable, when traditional survival strategies no longer work, when group members are dying despite everyone's best efforts, maintaining the motivation to continue struggling for survival requires extraordinary mental resilience. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed sophisticated social rituals and cultural practices during this period that were specifically designed to maintain group morale and individual psychological health. Sites from this period show evidence of artistic activities, musical instruments, and decorative objects that serve no obvious survival function, but were apparently important enough to maintain even under the most desperate conditions. These cultural activities weren't just entertainment or distraction. They were psychological technologies that helped maintain the mental health and social cohesion that were essential for group survival. The creation and maintenance of art, music, and decorative objects provided evidence that human life retained meaning and value, even under the most adverse conditions. Archaeological sites also show evidence of increasingly sophisticated burial practices and memorial activities during this period. When group members died, surviving humans invested significant time and energy in funeral rituals and grave construction that served important psychological functions for the survivors. These burial practices weren't just respect for the dead. They were psychological technologies that helped surviving group members process grief and maintain their commitment to continued survival. The rituals surrounding death helped reinforce group bonds and cultural continuity that were essential for maintaining hope during the crisis. The development of storytelling and oral tradition also appears to have accelerated during the volcanic winter. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed increasingly sophisticated narrative traditions during this period that served crucial psychological functions. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were psychological survival tools that helped group members make sense of their experiences and maintain hope for the future. Stories about past survival successes, about the possibility of better conditions, and about the importance of group cooperation helped maintain the mental frameworks that were necessary for continued survival efforts. The storytelling traditions that emerged during this period also served important functions for preserving and transmitting survival knowledge. When written language didn't exist, oral traditions were the only way to ensure that crucial survival information could be passed down to future generations. The stories that developed during the volcanic winter helped ensure that the hard-won survival knowledge wouldn't be lost. Perhaps most importantly, human groups developed new forms of social organization during this period that were specifically designed to provide psychological support and maintain group cohesion under extreme stress. The archaeological evidence suggests that survival during the volcanic winter required levels of cooperation and mutual support that were unprecedented in human history. These enhanced cooperation systems weren't just practical arrangements for sharing resources. They were social technologies that provided psychological security and emotional support that helped individuals maintain their mental health during the crisis. The knowledge that other group members could be counted on for support helped individuals find the strength to continue struggling for survival even when conditions seemed hopeless. The leadership structures that emerged during this period also show adaptations to the psychological Challenges of crisis survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that leadership during the volcanic winter was less about individual dominance and more about collective decision-making and mutual support systems. The leaders who emerged during this crisis were those who could provide hope, maintain group morale, and coordinate collective survival efforts. These leadership skills were different from the physical dominance or individual prowess that might have been important in earlier periods. The crisis required leaders who could inspire and sustain group cooperation under the most challenging conditions. The development of these psychological and social survival technologies during the volcanic winter had profound, long-term impacts on human culture. The mental resilience, social cooperation, and cultural practices that were developed during the crisis became fundamental characteristics of human society for the rest of human history. The storytelling traditions, artistic practices, and social rituals that emerged during humanity's darkest hours became the foundation for the rich cultural traditions that would characterize human societies for the next 74,000 years. The psychological survival strategies developed during the Toba crisis became the basis for human cultural complexity and social sophistication. Archaeological evidence also suggests that the crisis experience itself became an important part of human cultural identity. The knowledge that their ancestors had survived the unsurvivable appears to have given human groups a sense of collective resilience and confidence that influenced their approach to subsequent challenges. This collective memory of survival success may have been one of the most important psychological legacies of the volcanic winter. Human groups that knew their ancestors had overcome the ultimate survival challenge were more willing to take risks, more confident in their ability to adapt to new conditions, and more resilient in the face of subsequent difficulties. The psychological innovations that emerged during the Toba crisis also established fundamental human beliefs about the relationship between individual and group survival. The experience of surviving through cooperation and mutual support established the principle that individual survival was best achieved through group success rather than individual competition. This cooperative approach to survival psychology became embedded in human culture and continues to influence human behavior today. The belief that collective action and mutual support enhance rather than diminish individual prospects became a fundamental aspect of human psychology that distinguishes humans from most other species. Perhaps most importantly, the psychological survival strategies developed during the volcanic winter established the human capacity for maintaining hope and continuing to struggle for survival, even under seemingly impossible conditions. This psychological resilience became a defining characteristic of human nature that would drive human achievement for the rest of human history. The mental toughness and social cooperation that allowed small groups of humans to maintain hope and continue struggling for survival during years of volcanic winter became the psychological foundation for every subsequent human achievement. The same mental resilience that kept our ancestors alive during humanity's darkest hours continues to drive human success today. Chapter 9. Social cooperation. If there's one factor that determined whether human groups survived the Toba volcanic winter or perished, it was their ability to work together. The archaeological evidence is clear. The human groups that survived were those that developed the most sophisticated systems for cooperation, resource sharing, and collective decision-making. Individual strength, intelligence, or survival skills weren't enough. Survival required unprecedented levels of social cooperation. The volcanic winter created survival challenges that were simply too complex and demanding for individuals or even small family groups to handle alone. Maintaining fires continuously for years, procuring and processing food from marginal sources, constructing and maintaining sophisticated shelters, managing water purification systems. All of these activities required coordinated efforts from multiple individuals with specialized skills. Archaeological evidence from post-Toba sites shows that human social organization became dramatically more sophisticated during this period. Sites contain evidence of task specialization, resource pooling, and collective decision-making systems that were far more complex than anything seen in earlier human settlements. The division of labor that emerged during the volcanic winter wasn't just informal cooperation. It was systematic specialization that allowed human groups to maximize their survival efficiency. Some individuals specialized in tool-making and maintenance, others in food procurement and processing, others in shelter construction and maintenance, and others in group coordination and decision-making. This specialization was crucial because the survival challenges of the volcanic winter required expertise in multiple complex areas simultaneously. No individual could master all the skills necessary for group survival, so groups had to organize themselves to ensure that all essential capabilities were available when needed. The resource-sharing systems that developed during this period were also remarkably sophisticated. Archaeological sites show evidence of centralized storage and distribution systems that ensured fair allocation of scarce resources according to need and contribution. These weren't just informal sharing arrangements. They were organized economic systems with rules, protocols, and enforcement mechanisms. The development of these resource-sharing systems required high levels of trust and social cohesion. When survival depends on pooling scarce resources, group members must have confidence that their contributions will be fairly valued and that they will receive support when they need it. The social bonds necessary for this level of trust had to be carefully developed and maintained. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed sophisticated social rituals and bonding activities during this period that were specifically designed to strengthen group cohesion and maintain the trust necessary for effective resource sharing. These activities weren't just social pleasantries. They were essential social technologies that made survival cooperation possible. The decision-making systems that emerged during the volcanic winter also show remarkable sophistication. Survival decisions during this period were often complex and had life or death consequences for entire groups. Making these decisions required input from multiple individuals with different types of expertise and required consensus building processes that could achieve group commitment to difficult choices. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed formal consultation and decision-making processes during this period that ensured all relevant knowledge and perspectives were considered before important choices were made. These processes balanced the need for expertise with the need for group consensus and commitment. The communication systems that supported this enhanced cooperation also underwent rapid development during the volcanic winter. Coordinating complex survival activities across multiple individuals required more sophisticated communication capabilities than had been necessary in earlier periods. Archaeological evidence suggests that human language and symbolic communication became more complex during this period, with development of specialized vocabularies and communication protocols that could support the precise coordination that survival required. The communication innovations that emerged during the crisis became the foundation for the sophisticated language systems that would characterize later human cultures. Perhaps most importantly, the cooperation systems that developed during the volcanic winter extended beyond individual groups to include networks of cooperation between different human populations. Archaeological evidence shows that geographically separated human groups maintained contact and mutual support relationships even during the worst of the crisis. These intergroup cooperation networks were crucial for survival because local conditions varied dramatically during the volcanic winter. Groups in some areas might have temporary advantages in food procurement, while groups in other areas might have better shelter or water access. Sharing resources and information across these networks enhanced survival prospects for all participants. The maintenance of these intergroup networks required sophisticated social technologies for establishing trust, maintaining contact across distances, and coordinating mutual assistance activities. The social innovations that made these networks possible during the crisis became the foundation for the trade and diplomatic systems that would connect human societies for the rest of human history. The cooperation systems that emerged during the volcanic winter also had to address the psychological and social stresses that extreme survival conditions created. When group members are hungry, cold, exhausted, and afraid, maintaining effective cooperation requires social technologies that can manage conflict and maintain group cohesion under stress. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed sophisticated conflict resolution and stress management systems during this period. These systems included protocols for addressing disputes, methods for managing individual stress and mental health, and rituals for maintaining group morale and solidarity. The social innovations that allowed human groups to maintain effective cooperation under extreme stress became fundamental aspects of human social organization that continue to influence human behavior today. The principles of collective responsibility, mutual support, and shared decision-making that were developed during the crisis became defining characteristics of human society. The cooperation systems that emerged during the Toba crisis also established the principle that group survival enhances rather than diminishes individual prospects. The experience of surviving through cooperation reinforced the understanding that individual success is best achieved through collective success rather than individual competition. This cooperative approach to survival became embedded in human culture and psychology in ways that distinguished humans from most other species. While most animals cooperate only with close relatives or in limited circumstances, humans developed the capacity for extensive cooperation with non-relatives across large groups and complex social networks. The social cooperation technologies that allowed human groups to survive the volcanic winter became the foundation for all subsequent human social achievement. The ability to organize complex activities across large groups, to share resources fairly, to make collective decisions effectively, and to maintain cooperation under stress became the basis for human civilization. Archaeological evidence shows that the cooperation systems developed during the Toba crisis continued to evolve and improve for thousands of years after the volcanic winter ended. The social innovations that emerged during humanity's most challenging period became the foundation for the sophisticated social organizations that would eventually create cities, nations, and global civilization. The volcanic winter proved that human survival depended not on individual strength or capability, but on the ability to work together effectively under the most challenging conditions. The cooperation technologies that emerged during this ultimate test became the defining characteristics of human society for the next 74,000 years. Chapter 10. Adaptation and Ingenuity. What makes the human response to the Toba volcanic winter so remarkable isn't just that our ancestors survived. It's how quickly they adapted and innovated in response to completely unprecedented challenges. We're talking about technological and social innovations that emerged over decades or centuries, not the thousands or millions of years that evolutionary adaptation usually requires. The archaeological record from the post-Toba period shows a rate of innovation that is unprecedented in human history up to that point. New technologies, new social organizations, new survival strategies, all appearing within relatively short periods of time as human groups rapidly adapted to the altered environmental conditions. This rapid innovation was only possible because humans had already developed the cognitive and social capabilities that allowed them to deliberately modify their behavior and technology in response to new challenges. Unlike other species that adapt to environmental changes through biological evolution over many generations, humans could adapt culturally within single generations. The tool technologies that emerged during the volcanic winter show this rapid innovation clearly. Archaeological sites contain evidence of tool designs that represent fundamental departures from earlier traditions. These weren't just refinements of existing tools. They were completely new approaches to solving survival problems that hadn't existed before the crisis. The speed at which these new tool technologies appeared and spread across different human populations is remarkable. Archaeological evidence shows that innovative tool designs developed in one region would appear at sites hundreds of miles away, within relatively short periods of time, suggesting rapid communication and adoption of successful innovations. This rapid dissemination of technological innovations was crucial for survival because it allowed all human groups to benefit from the best survival technologies regardless of where those technologies were originally developed. The communication networks that enabled this technology sharing became a fundamental survival advantage that distinguished humans from other species. The social innovations that emerged during the volcanic winter show similar patterns of rapid development and dissemination. New forms of organization, new cooperation strategies, new resource sharing systems, all appearing quickly in response to survival needs and spreading rapidly among different human populations. Perhaps most remarkably, the innovations that emerged during the volcanic winter weren't just short-term survival expedients. They were fundamental advances in human capability that continued to be useful long after the crisis had passed. Technologies and social systems developed during the volcanic winter became the foundation for accelerated human development in all subsequent periods. The adaptive strategies that emerged during the Toba crisis also show remarkable sophistication in their approach to uncertainty and environmental variability. Human groups couldn't predict how long the volcanic winter would last or exactly what challenges they would face, so they had to develop survival strategies that were flexible and adaptable to changing conditions. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups developed what we might call adaptive management approaches during this period, survival strategies that were designed to be modified and improved based on experience and changing conditions. These approaches showed sophisticated understanding of the need for continuous learning and adaptation in uncertain environments. The development of these adaptive management strategies required human groups to become systematic in their approach to survival innovation. They had to experiment with new approaches, evaluate their effectiveness, and rapidly adopt or abandon strategies based on results. This systematic approach to innovation became a defining characteristic of human problem-solving for the rest of human history. The cognitive demands of surviving the volcanic winter also appear to have accelerated the development of human intellectual capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that human problem-solving, planning, and communication abilities all became more sophisticated during this period in response to the complex challenges that survival required. The need to coordinate complex survival activities across multiple individuals and groups required advances in communication, planning, and social organization that pushed human cognitive capabilities to new levels. The intellectual demands of survival during the crisis appear to have catalyzed developments in human intelligence that wouldn't have occurred under normal conditions. The archaeological record also shows that the volcanic winter period was characterized by increased experimentation with symbolic behavior and artistic expression. Sites from this period contain more evidence of decorative objects, artistic activities, and symbolic communication than earlier sites, suggesting that the crisis may have accelerated the development of uniquely human cultural capabilities. This increase in symbolic and artistic behavior wasn't just leisure activity. It appears to have served important functions for survival. Symbolic communication enhanced coordination capabilities, artistic activities strengthened social bonds, and cultural expressions helped maintain group identity and morale during the crisis. The innovation strategies that emerged during the volcanic winter also show remarkable sophistication in their approach to risk management. Human groups had to balance the need for innovation with the dangers of failed experiments when survival margins were extremely thin. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups developed systematic approaches to innovation during this period that minimized risks while maximizing learning opportunities. They appear to have used small-scale experiments, parallel development of alternative approaches, and careful evaluation of results before committing to major changes in survival strategies. These risk management approaches to innovation became fundamental aspects of human problem-solving that continue to influence human behavior today. The principles of systematic experimentation, careful evaluation, and risk-managed innovation that were developed during the volcanic winter became the foundation for all subsequent human technological development. Perhaps most importantly, the adaptation and innovation that occurred during the Toba crisis established human confidence in the power of intelligence and cooperation to overcome environmental challenges. The experience of successfully innovating their way through the ultimate survival crisis gave human groups confidence that no environmental challenge was insurmountable. This confidence in human adaptive capability became a defining characteristic of human culture that would drive human achievement for the rest of human history. The belief that intelligence and cooperation could overcome any challenge became embedded in human psychology and continues to influence human behavior today. The adaptive innovations that emerged during the volcanic winter also established the principle that survival challenges could be opportunities for advancement, rather than just threats to be endured. Human groups that successfully innovated during the crisis often emerged stronger and more capable than they had been before the crisis began. This transformation of challenges into opportunities became a fundamental aspect of human approach to survival and development. The ability to use difficult conditions as catalysts for innovation and improvement became one of the most distinctive characteristics of human behavior. The rate and sophistication of adaptation and innovation during the Toba volcanic winter demonstrated that humans had become something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth, a species that could deliberately and rapidly modify its capabilities in response to environmental challenges. This capacity for intentional adaptation would prove to be the most important factor in human success for the next 74,000 years. The adaptive capabilities that were tested and proven during humanity's most challenging period became the foundation for human dominance over environmental challenges of every type. Chapter 11. The Long Road BAs. The volcanic winter couldn't last forever. After 6 to 10 years of the most extreme conditions, the atmospheric effects of the Toba eruption gradually began to diminish. The sulfuric acid aerosols that had been reflecting sunlight back into space slowly settled out of the stratosphere. Temperatures began to rise. The ash-filled skies gradually cleared. For the first time in years, the sun began to shine with something approaching its normal intensity. But the world that emerged from the volcanic winter was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before the eruption. Entire ecosystems had collapsed and would need to be rebuilt. Plant and animal communities that had existed for millions of years had been permanently altered. The few human groups that had survived were scattered across vast distances and had been reduced to populations so small that they represented only a tiny fraction of pre-eruption human numbers. For most species that experience such severe population bottlenecks, recovery is slow and uncertain. Many never recover at all. They remain at low population levels and eventually go extinct. The genetic diversity lost during the bottleneck often can't be recovered, leaving the species vulnerable to future challenges. But human recovery from the Toba bottleneck was different. Not only did human populations recover, They expanded with unprecedented speed and success. Within 20,000 years of the end of the volcanic winter, humans had spread from their survival refugia to populate most of Asia, had begun the migrations that would lead to the settlement of Australia and Europe, and had developed technologies and social organizations that were far more sophisticated than anything that had existed before the eruption. This rapid recovery and expansion was only possible because the survival strategies that human groups had developed during the volcanic winter had made them far more capable and adaptable than their ancestors had been. The innovations forced by the crisis had transformed human survival capabilities in ways that gave them overwhelming advantages over other species and environmental challenges. The tool technologies that had been developed during the crisis proved to be far superior to pre-eruption technologies for all aspects of survival and resource exploitation. Human groups emerging from the volcanic winter had weapons, food processing techniques, water management systems, and construction technologies that allowed them to thrive in environments where their ancestors had merely survived. The social cooperation systems that had been essential for surviving the crisis also proved to be powerful advantages for expansion and development. Human groups that had learned to coordinate complex activities across large networks, to share resources efficiently, and to make collective decisions effectively were well equipped to organize the large-scale activities that successful expansion required. Archaeological evidence shows that the human expansion following the volcanic winter was systematic and well-organized rather than random or opportunistic. Human groups appear to have planned their expansion routes carefully, established supply lines and communication networks, and coordinated their activities to maximize their chances of successful settlement in new territories. This organized approach to expansion was only possible because of the planning and coordination capabilities that had been developed during the crisis. Human groups that had learned to organize complex survival activities during the volcanic winter could apply the same organizational skills to the challenges of territorial expansion and settlement. The expansion was also facilitated by the advanced scouting and environmental assessment capabilities that human groups had developed during the crisis. Years of surviving in harsh and unpredictable conditions had taught human groups to quickly and accurately assess environmental conditions, identify resources, and evaluate the potential of new territories. These environmental assessment skills allowed expanding human groups to identify the most promising territories for settlement and to avoid areas that would be difficult or dangerous to settle. The ability to make accurate assessments of environmental potential was a crucial advantage that accelerated the expansion process. Perhaps most importantly, the human groups that emerged from the volcanic winter had developed technologies and social systems that were inherently scalable. The innovations that had been developed for small survival groups could be expanded and adapted to support much larger populations and more complex activities. The food procurement and processing technologies that had kept small groups alive during the crisis could be scaled up to support larger populations. The water management systems could be expanded to serve permanent settlements. The construction technologies could be adapted to build larger and more sophisticated structures. The social cooperation systems were also scalable. The organization and coordination techniques that had been essential for group survival could be adapted to coordinate activities across multiple groups and larger populations. The resource sharing and decision-making systems could be expanded to manage more complex economic and social relationships. This scalability of survival innovations was crucial For the rapid expansion that followed the volcanic winter, human groups didn't have to completely reinvent their technologies and social systems as their populations grew. They could build on and expand the innovations that had already proven successful during the crisis. The expansion was also accelerated by the knowledge-sharing networks that had been essential for survival during the volcanic winter. Human groups that had maintained communication and cooperation during the crisis continued to share information and innovations during the expansion period. This ongoing knowledge sharing meant that successful expansion strategies and settlement technologies developed by one group could be rapidly adopted by other groups. The communication networks that had helped human groups survive the crisis became powerful tools for accelerating expansion and development. The psychological confidence that came from surviving the ultimate crisis also played a crucial role in the rapid expansion. Human groups that had survived conditions that killed most other large animals on the planet had developed extraordinary confidence in their ability to overcome environmental challenges and adapt to new conditions. This psychological confidence made human groups more willing to take the risks that expansion required. They were more willing to explore new territories, more confident in their ability to establish successful settlements in unfamiliar environments, and more resilient in the face of the inevitable setbacks that expansion activities involved. Archaeological evidence also shows that the expansion period was characterized by continued innovation and technological development. Rather than simply applying existing technologies to new environments, expanding human groups continued to develop new solutions and improve their capabilities as they encountered new challenges. This ongoing innovation during the expansion period suggests that the innovative mindset that had been essential for surviving the volcanic winter had become a permanent characteristic of human culture. Human groups had learned that continuous adaptation and improvement enhanced their success, and they continued to apply this principle even when immediate survival was no longer threatened. The expansion also benefited from the diverse survival strategies that different human groups had developed during the volcanic winter. Groups that had survived in different environments and under different conditions had developed different technological and social innovations, and the expansion period allowed these diverse innovations to be combined and integrated. This combination of diverse survival strategies created hybrid approaches that were more effective than any single strategy would have been. The expansion period became a time of technological and social synthesis that combined the best innovations from all surviving human groups. The success of the post-volcanic winter expansion also demonstrates the long-term benefits of the population bottleneck that had seemed so threatening during the crisis. While the bottleneck had reduced human genetic diversity, it had also eliminated human populations that had been less adaptable and less innovative. The human groups that survived the bottleneck were those that had been most successful at developing effective survival strategies. This meant that the human populations that drove the post-crisis expansion were essentially selected for adaptability, innovation, and cooperation, characteristics that proved to be powerful advantages for expansion and development. The expansion period also saw the development of more sophisticated long-distance communication and transportation technologies. Human groups that were settling territories hundreds or thousands of miles apart needed to maintain contact for trade, information sharing, and mutual support. The communication and transportation technologies that were developed during the expansion period were far more advanced than anything that had existed before the volcanic winter. These technologies allowed human groups to maintain the cooperative networks that had been essential for survival during the crisis, even as they spread across much larger geographical areas. Perhaps most remarkably, the expansion period was characterized by accelerating cultural development and increasing social complexity. Rather than simply focusing on basic survival and resource exploitation, expanding human groups were developing art, music, ritual practices, and other cultural innovations that enhanced their social cohesion and cultural identity. This cultural development during the expansion period suggests that the survival strategies developed during the volcanic winter had been so successful that they freed up human energy and resources for activities beyond immediate survival needs. The technological and social innovations that had been essential for crisis survival had created capabilities that could support much more complex and sophisticated human societies. The expansion period also established patterns of human settlement and development that would influence human civilization for the rest of human history. The expansion routes, settlement patterns, and territorial organizations that were established during this period became the foundation for all subsequent human geographic and political development. By 50,000 years ago, roughly 25,000 years after the end of the volcanic winter, human populations had not only recovered from the Toba bottleneck but had expanded to populate most of the habitable areas of Africa, Asia, and were beginning the migrations that would lead to the settlement of Australia and Europe. More importantly, the human populations that emerged from this expansion period were fundamentally different from their pre-Toba ancestors. They had technologies, social organizations, and cultural capabilities that were far more sophisticated and effective than anything that had existed before the crisis. The volcanic winter that had nearly ended the human story had instead become the catalyst for the most rapid and successful period of human development in the entire history of the species. The survival strategies that have been developed under the most extreme conditions had become the foundation for human dominance over environmental challenges of every type. The recovery and expansion that followed the Toba volcanic winter demonstrated that human beings had become something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth, a species that could not only survive extreme environmental challenges but could use those challenges as opportunities for advancement and development. This transformation of crisis into opportunity would become a defining characteristic of human civilization for the next 74,000 years. The principle that challenges could be catalysts for innovation and improvement, first proven during the volcanic winter, became embedded in human culture and continues to drive human achievement today. Chapter 12. Legacy of the Dark Years. The Toba volcanic winter ended more than 70,000 years ago, but its impact on human development continues to this day. The survival strategies, technologies, and social innovations that were developed during those dark years became the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. In many ways, everything that makes us uniquely human can be traced back to those critical years when our ancestors learned to survive the unsurvivable. The most profound legacy of the volcanic winter was the establishment of human confidence in the power of intelligence and cooperation to overcome any environmental challenge. Before Toba, humans were just another species struggling to survive in a hostile world. After Toba, they had proven that no environmental challenge was insurmountable if approached with sufficient intelligence, cooperation, and determination. This confidence in human adaptive capability became a defining characteristic of human psychology that would drive human achievement for the rest of human history. The belief that any problem could be solved through human ingenuity became embedded in human culture and continues to influence human behavior today. The Technological innovations that emerged during the volcanic winter also had profound long-term impacts. The advanced tool technologies, sophisticated construction techniques, and innovative resource management systems that were developed during the crisis became the foundation for all subsequent human technological development. The principle that human capabilities could be extended and enhanced through artificial tools, first proven during the volcanic winter, became the driving force behind every human technology from agriculture to space exploration. The innovation mindset that emerged during the crisis became the foundation for the continuous technological advancement that characterizes human civilization. The social cooperation systems that were essential for surviving the volcanic winter became the foundation for all subsequent human social organization. The ability to coordinate complex activities across large groups, to share resources efficiently, and to make collective decisions effectively became defining characteristics of human society. The cooperative networks that had been essential for survival during the crisis evolved into the trade systems, diplomatic relationships, and international organizations that connect human societies today. The principle that collective action enhances rather than diminishes individual prospects became a fundamental aspect of human social organization. Perhaps most importantly, the crisis established the pattern of human response to environmental challenges that continues to this day. When humans face new threats or difficulties, they respond with the same basic strategy that was first developed during the volcanic winter. Analyze the challenge, develop new tools and techniques to address it, coordinate collective efforts to implement solutions, and continuously improve approaches based on experience. This pattern can be seen in human responses to every major challenge throughout history, from the development of agriculture to address food security, to the creation of cities to manage population growth, to the development of modern medicine to address disease, to current efforts to address climate change and environmental degradation. Toba crisis also established the principle that environmental challenges could be opportunities for advancement, rather than just threats to be endured. The experience of emerging from the volcanic winter stronger and more capable than before became a template for human approach to difficult conditions. This transformation of challenges into opportunities became embedded in human culture and psychology in ways that continue to influence human behavior today. Rather than simply trying to return to pre-challenge conditions, humans consistently use difficult situations as catalysts for innovation and improvement. The genetic legacy of the Toba bottleneck also continues to influence human development. While the population bottleneck reduced human genetic diversity, it also concentrated the human gene pool around variants that enhanced survival under extreme conditions. The genetic characteristics that were selected for during the crisis, intelligence, adaptability, cooperation, stress tolerance, became more common in human populations and continue to influence human capabilities today. In many ways, the genetic legacy of Toba is still shaping human potential and achievement. The psychological resilience that was essential for surviving the volcanic winter also became a permanent characteristic of human nature. The mental toughness and emotional stability that were required to maintain hope and continue struggling for survival under seemingly hopeless conditions became embedded in human psychology. This psychological resilience continues to be one of the most distinctive characteristics of human behavior. Humans consistently demonstrate the ability to maintain hope and continue working toward goals even under the most adverse conditions, a capacity that can be traced directly back to the survival requirements of the volcanic winter. The cultural innovations that emerged during the crisis also had lasting impacts. The storytelling traditions, artistic practices, and ritual activities that were developed to maintain group morale and cultural continuity during the crisis became the foundation for the rich cultural traditions that characterize human societies. The principle that cultural activities serve essential social and psychological functions, first demonstrated during the volcanic winter, became embedded in human social organization and continues to influence human behavior today. Perhaps most remarkably, the survival strategies that were developed for small groups under extreme conditions proved to be scalable to challenges involving billions of people and global-scale problems. The same basic approaches that kept small human groups alive during the volcanic winter are being used today to address challenges like climate change, resource management, and space exploration. This scalability of human survival strategies suggests that the innovations developed during the Toba crisis weren't just temporary adaptations to specific conditions. They were fundamental discoveries about how intelligent beings can successfully navigate complex, dangerous environments. The modern world faces challenges that are different in scale and complexity from the volcanic winter, but the basic human response patterns remain the same. When faced with climate change, humans are developing new technologies, organizing global cooperation efforts, and continuously adapting their approaches based on experience, exactly the same pattern that was first established during the Toba crisis. The legacy of the volcanic winter also continues to influence human confidence and ambition. The knowledge that human ancestors survived the ultimate environmental catastrophe gives modern humans confidence that no challenge is insurmountable. This confidence continues to drive human ambition and achievement in every field of endeavor. The Toba volcanic winter was nearly the end of the human story. Instead, it became the beginning of human dominance over environmental challenges. The survival strategies that were developed during humanity's darkest hours became the foundation for human success for the next 74,000 years. Today, as humans face new challenges and reach toward new achievements, they are still using the same fundamental approaches that allowed their ancestors to survive when the sky turned black and the world became uninhabitable. The legacy of those dark years continues to shape human potential and drive human achievement. We are the descendants of the ultimate survivors.